Welcome to episode 225 of School Librarians United. I'm your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian wrapping up my 16th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I'd like to extend a very special welcome this week to listeners Christy in Spain, Carrie in Florida, Jennifer in New Jersey, Christopher in New York, Amanda and Caroline in Texas. Carrie in Illinois wrote, "I've learned so much from you. I've gotten my job, received grants, and hosted multiple authors with the help from your podcast." And friends, if you want to make sure that I read your email on the podcast, put it in all caps, like Hannah from Florida, who shared this email with me. And she wrote, "Excited new librarian!" Exclamation points. I just passed. Moments ago, I passed my certification exam to become the media specialist at my daughter's elementary school. I have listened to your podcast to learn and also get excited about the possibility of becoming a librarian after teaching in a general ed classroom. Thank you for the work you are doing and for the support you are providing. I am so excited to get a sticker to show my support for the show, and she included her address. And friends, that's always an option to you. So then Carrie finishes her email by saying, "Now I need to call my husband and tell him the good news. Yes, you were the first person I told. Thank you so much." I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me either on Facebook, on Twitter, my handle is @LMS_United, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. Friends, if you haven't heard episode 224 yet, which dropped this past Monday, I announced a new sponsorship with Literati Book Fairs. Tune in to learn all about them and their generous offer. Librarians who book their first book fair this fall and mention the code UNITED will receive a $500 gift card from Titlewave. And now a word from our sponsor, Capstone. Capstone is an innovative publisher and education technology provider of children's content for school libraries, classrooms, and at-home learning. Home of the award-winning PebbleGo research database, Capstone has a passion for creating inspired learning and intellectual curiosity in children, and I am so excited to be working with them. Friends, I am grateful to Capstone for their continued commitment to support the podcast in Season 5. They are offering listeners of School Librarians United a very special discount. Visit shop.capstonepub.com and use the code UNITED to get $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and Capstone interactive ebooks. That's code UNITED for $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and ebooks on shop.capstonepub.com. And now for our episode, Caution, Content Warnings, and my conversation with Amanda Hunt. Amanda Hunt, welcome to the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here, finally.
Friends, I'm having kind of a fangirl moment because every time Amanda's tweets come up in my feed, I feel like I have to say something, and I feel like every time she tweets something, because I'm not on Instagram, but you are, Amanda, I just feel like now here is one of my valued PLNs and on my list of people I wanted to meet. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm so excited to be here. I'm also excited because the school's almost out, but that's a whole other thing.
Yes. So for our friends in the South who are getting out, how many days do you have left, Amanda?
I have 9.5 days left. We're in the single digits, y'all.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll talk to you in late July, early August when you're going to be like, no.
Yes, we don't like our northern friends then.
That's okay. That's okay. You know what? Everybody's got to work, and our calendars are just a little bit different. But So, Amanda, for those who don't stalk you on social media, would you give our listeners an idea of where in the country do you work? Tell us about your current library, what grades you support, and a little bit about what makes your day, just special.
Awesome. Yeah. So I am actually in a middle school, 6th grade through 8th grade school library. And we are a public school, and I am from New Braunfels, Texas, which is just outside of San Antonio, for those of you who may not be as familiar with our giant state. And I actually work at the school that I attended as a child. So, and my dad taught there, and I was lucky enough when I was in elementary to work at my mom's school with her before she retired. So it's it's all in the family. So being able to work in the community that I was raised in, it's such a great experience.
So I'm curious, you grew up in a family of educators. Was it just a foregone conclusion? And when did you make that leap? Because I'm assuming you did start out in the classroom. Yeah. So, your parents were thrilled, but when did you make that leap into the library? Because I am guessing they weren't librarians.
No, they weren't. Very voracious readers, but not librarians. My aunt actually was a public librarian for a while, and a big reader as well. So that was always really cool in the family to have that connection with someone else. And no, I was very adamant I wasn't going to go into education. And then I switched in high school, and I was like, okay, yeah, I will. And then I switched in college and was like, no, I won't. And I ended up graduating with a public relations degree, which actually I feel like ended up helping me a lot. I also had a double major in English. So it's like, and so, but once I got in the real world, I was like, y'all don't get summers out here. Like, y'all don't do that. But no, it was just, I went into subbing, and that's actually how I got my first job as a social worker at the school that my mom had worked her entire career and that I had gone through. And then I was in the classroom, and I was like, this is hard. I love me some teachers to death, and I don't know how y'all do what you do in this, especially in the world that we're working in now. The classroom teachers, y'all are the heroes. But yeah, so I just took my love of reading and my love of working with children and kind of just put that together. And I was an elementary librarian for 5 years, and kind of felt like I needed a little bit of a change. And then I went to middle school, and everyone told me, no, don't go to the middle school. They're the scary kids. Like, don't do it. And it ended up being like where my heart was and where I think I should have been the entire time, because they get my humor. I get their humor. We read all the same books, And so it was just kind of like, it took me a while to get where I'm supposed to be, but I feel like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be now.
Aw, that's amazing. Well, and I think most people listening can completely relate to some of this sort of all over the place. And, I believe no experience is ever wasted. And
Agreed.
We may not realize it in the time. In the moment, we may feel like we are always trying to catch up, or we're treading water. I don't know what it is. Yes. But, unfortunately, we have to sort of be in a place where we can reflect on what we were doing and how all of it's going to come into play at some point in our lives. And we just don't know. So it's all those skills that you become, like all those compounded lived experiences, that really create who you are. And I'm just going to say, everybody's afraid of the grade they haven't taught. So, when I tell people I was an elementary librarian for 14 years, I work in high school right now, they're like, oh my God, that's terrifying. That's terrifying. I was like, no, and some people are like, oh no, middle school's scary. And I was like, the people who teach middle, they love this age group. They absolutely do. I got to tell you, I would love to, I think it's such a wonderful thing. You've got the best of both worlds, honestly. And so the best part about the middles is that they're all toilet trained. They don't get homesick, and they don't get, and they understand sarcasm, because I learned very quickly when I went from teaching in the high school classroom to being an elementary librarian that littles do not understand sarcasm. They're all a bunch of Amelia Bedelias taking you word for word, and you're like, I can't do this.
Exactly.
So, no.
Yeah, I remember when you made the change, I was like, you're jumping way out there. Like, you skip middle altogether. So
I leapfrogged.
Yes.
Yes, I leapfrogged. I went from reading, elementary, fiction, kid lit, where at the worst thing that happens is the dog dies.
Right.
To high school, which, and forgive me, for today's, this is very relevant to today's topic, which is caution, content warnings, because my God, it all happens in high school and YA, and I'm sure you're going to tell us about this to a certain extent in the middle grades as well, but and we can even talk about like content warnings for our younger group, our kidlit, because I wasn't very sophisticated. Friends, you are going to be blown away by Amanda's approach to supporting these content warnings in her collection. I was never as methodical, and the closest thing I got to it in the elementary school was when somebody came by to check out a book, I would say, you might want to grab a box of Kleenex. And right. I said, you might grab a few tissues. And they're like, I know, it's going to be okay. And usually because there's a dog on the cover. And
right. Or it's Bridge to Terabithia, which killed us all on the inside when we read that one.
It really Bridge to Terabithia. So I'm going to date myself. When the movie came out, I believe, so our daughter, my husband took my daughter to the movies. He's like, we're going to go see Bridge to Terabithia. And at that time, I wasn't an elementary librarian. But I think I might have, I don't know. I have to look it up now. But I swear to God, he came home, he's like, that movie was sad. I was like, I'm sorry. Yeah, absolutely. I remember him coming home, he was pissed. I think he just didn't think like sad things happened in children's movies. I'm like,
right?
Listen, Disney starts with I was going to say Disney in the first 2 minutes, and a parent has to die because you can't have parents in any Disney movies.
No.
Yeah,
it's part of it.
God, you just expect it, like, and Disney, but since we're talking about this, it's not like Disney gives us any content warnings.
Not at all.
No Bambi's parents are going to get shot. I'm sorry, spoiler, friends.
Yep.
But the book, the book and the movie have been out for a long time. I mean, Dumbo, I refuse.
Dumbo,
I can't do it.
That was the one. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Tarzan. Have you seen Tarzan?
Yep.
Traumatized. Deaths on both sides. It was terrible. My kids loved it. And I was like, I'm leaving the room.
I can't watch this. And I'm going to lose it. Yeah.
But Disney doesn't ask forgiveness. They don't ask permission. There's just going to be a death.
Yeah.
With the, and I think with the exception of like Peter Pan, but even that is like, Peter Pan doesn't exactly. No, anyway.
But they are living in a parentless world still, so they got around
it. That's true. That's true. They have the dog. The dog is yes, that's true because the parents go out. And they're left in the care of the dog. And I'm just this is the last thing I'm going to say is I grew up with a sheepdog in our house, and the last thing you do is leave a sheepdog in charge of the children. So.
Agreed.
I'm sorry, friends. And I haven't even had any wine. It's just, I think I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since Amanda and I sort of did this connection and we're like, what do you want to talk about? So, friends, I follow Amanda on Twitter, but I think your sweet spot is Instagram. Isn't that right?
It is. It's where I prefer to be.
Right. And I think you're just on Twitter for people like me who are stodgy. And I mean, there is a group of us who are like, I don't have time for Instagram.
Oh, I totally understand that. And I love my Twitter PLN. Like, honestly, that's where I go for my professional connections and learning and ideas and lessons and things like that. Like on Instagram, it's like everybody, can be there. So sometimes it's nice to go to Twitter and be like, this is like the adults having their PD.
Well, Well, and friends, I'm going to be completely honest. Until Amanda told us what grade she taught, I couldn't tell from your posts. In fact, I'm kind of surprised because I thought you were a high school librarian, and I don't even know if it's in your bio. This shows you, I knew I didn't even look at your bio.
Yeah.
Does it say in your bio? Did I not notice?
I think it says 6 through 8, but it's okay. It's okay because
I swear,
you don't know.
No, I just look at all the content and I'm like, oh, look, there's adult. Oh, there's YA. Oh, she's doing some picture books. Hey, wow, that's crazy. Friends, you will never have enough money to buy all the books that Amanda has, posted about on social media. And let me just ask, does your collection actually have all those books? I mean, so the YA, no, those are going to be more like, tell us what your secret is. Just tell everybody.
So yeah, it used to be that I would read and review and post about middle grade and young adult because I feel like that's the two, areas that my library, purchases for. But I would be like doing a quick review in my Instagram story on a picture book that I read, or an early chapter book, or an adult title because I'm an adult and I also read those. And I get so much, influx of messages from people saying, well, can you elaborate? And then do you have a longer review that you wrote for this? And so then I was like, wow, we're adults and I can also review adult books. And also the picture books, I've seen amazing high school teachers use picture books in lessons. So I'm of the idea that, hopefully the post can reach everyone at some level, depending on, where you're working and who you're working with.
Yeah, I'm just going to say I had some very nice grant money, and there were, when I was doing some purchasing, I would pull up some of your posts and that was my shopping list. And so, but friends, I know I'm not alone. I put so much faith in my fellow school librarians. Like, I trust all of you implicitly because I know school librarians, put their work in. You do your homework. I trust you because I know you wouldn't put out anything that you didn't feel strongly about and that you hadn't yourself done that research.
Absolutely.
So that's why I'm so excited about today's topic. Just to remind everybody, because we've gone off on a little tangent, we're going to be talking about content warnings. So, I'm so excited about the show notes. And friends, you're going to definitely want to make some time because Amanda's been incredibly generous in the things that she's shared. But I noticed in reading some of your blog posts, you mentioned that you have library aides. Would you give us a little rundown of how some people call them their minions or their, what is your sort of relationship in terms of how do they work within the program that you support in your school?
So when I started there, library aides were a thing already. And you can recruit them, and I start in February, March, giving a little talk of how you can apply. And then I announce usually after spring break who my library aides are for the following year. I take 7th and 8th graders. And a few teacher kids that are 6th grade that I've known for years that I know that can do the job. And I treat them like you would mostly an adult that's working with you. And I started off with 2 per class. This year I'm up to 5, and I feel like my sweet spot was probably 4. So I made that adjustment for next year. But I will say that I do expect a lot out of them. I teach them, the basics, obviously, of shelving and doing check-in, check-out, that kind of stuff. But they also do the inventory 100%. They also help me with weeding a lot. And they know how to take books out of the system. They know how to run reports. And so I really do train them because if I have to be gone to a conference or anything like that, I don't get a sub for the library. They are the sub. We have a hub that's right next to us is our iPad technician. And there's a wall of windows between the library and her office. and she's able to sit at her desk and do the work, and the kids work whether I'm there or not. So that's the expectation that I had. It's hard to do that without some kind of incentive at the middle school level. So I use an app called Classcraft. I have a whole blog about it if anyone ever is curious. But it is a way to gamify the library. And so what I do is the kids all get an avatar, they get a character, they work together as a team, and it's all supported. So if they're able to help each other out in the game, they get rewarded for being kind and that kind of thing. They can also earn crystals, looking like a game, right? And they can trick out their avatar, and they can cash in their crystals for things like snacks or drinks or time off of work and things like that. So it teaches them time management skills, responsibility. I mean, it's a whole thing, but I'm a huge fan of it, and I've been using it for 7 years now with amazing results.
So couple things. First of all, when you said you have 5 per class, is that per class period?
Yes.
Or per grade level?
No, for class period. So I have 30
period.
total. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. So you have a 6 period day. 6 period day, 5 per. And are they, in this case, is this considered a class they're taking? Because it is considered a class. Okay.
And I give them a grade
would
for it.
We would love to have that link in the show notes.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm making a little note. We'll put a little link in the show notes because there's somebody out there who's like, oh no, I want to hear about that.
Yeah.
All right. So I noticed because I did go on Instagram. You have an upcoming library aid alumni dinner. That is precious. So are these like high school students who come back? I mean, what do we...
Yes. I got college
kids
coming back to see. Yeah. So because of Instagram, it's a way for me to connect with my students. So I'm always real aware of that. So when I do a post that's an adult book, I make sure to put adult read at the top of it so that, all of my people that follow me are aware that that's an adult book. So I'm always aware of that with my content that I post, that current students, and because I have a public account, current students and high school and beyond, do follow me. And so because of that, every year I invite them to come back because I do miss them. And we grow so close throughout the school year because they're allowed to come from other classes and work in the library if they want to. So at any given time, like today, I had 11 library aides in the last period, and they were all working. And so honestly, like some of these kids I spend a huge majority of the day with. And then it goes to nothing because they leave us. And so they're able to kind of stay in touch with me on Instagram, but they do want to see me in person. And so I always do a library aid staycation during the day for the kids that I currently have as a reward at the end of the year, where they get to kind of hang out and play and do all the things in the library. And then after school, I have the alumni dinner. So...
Okay. Oh, that's so fun. Your Bookstagram posts, I mean, you post frequently. So I'm curious, are you methodical in having a schedule or a goal? Like what, for people who are really wed to the Instagram platform, and we can talk a little bit about those specific posts as well, because I can tell you have a method to how you want to word everything. But let's talk about like, what is when you post your bookstagrams, bookstagrams? Yes.
Bookstagrams,
when you post those, yes. What is your calendar look like, or what's your goal when you sort of create content?
So when I started using Instagram in this way, I was doing it under my school library account, and it was like 2017. And that summer I decided to read a book a day and do a post a day. That was my goal. And I did that again in 2018 summer, 2019 summer, and then the pandemic hit, and we were stuck at home. And so from then on, I have made it a goal of mine to read at least a book a day. And so because of me reading a book a day, like it even says it in my bio, because I want to make sure that everyone knows that at least once a day, you're going to get content from me. And so I'll read, like sometimes like yesterday I read 3 middle grade books. Well, I write the reviews for those and I save them in my draft so that I can make sure that if I hadn't read one today, or like I'm reading a longer book that takes a little bit more than a couple of days to read, that I have something ready to post. So it may not be technically one a day like that, but sometimes I read them like in bulk, especially on the weekends when you have more time, and then during the week. So ever since then, that's kind of been my goal. So I know by the end of the day, I have to do a post. And sometimes I do set an alarm. Sometimes I look at my analytics, like when I get the most views, that kind of thing. But honestly, I don't really ever look at that stuff that much, because I'm just there for sharing my love of books. That's pretty much why I'm here.
Friends, Amanda's backdrop, she has such a pretty Instagrammable backdrop. I mean, you honestly, I want a pretty backdrop, and I'm sitting here without one. But, you know, it's clear that this is something that has gone beyond simply I'm a librarian. No, this is something that consumes a great deal of your energy and your time. You know, you seem so ahead of the game when it comes to new titles that are coming out. So I'm really curious, and I know listeners want to know. On April 1st, you posted on Instagram, "I'm overloaded with #advanced reader copies, #books in all formats, physical, eARCs, and ALCs. Would you please spell out how you have the benefit of all this access?" And yes, friends, there are going to be links in the show notes.
Yeah. So when I was reading as much as I was, and I was posting as much as I was, and then during the pandemic, I ended up branding my account and switching it over from my school because there was a lot of uprising about book bans and all that stuff, right? So I wanted to make sure that everything I was posting was a representation of me and not my campus. So when I made that switch, and I was posting more and more and more, I started to read advanced reader copies through NetGalley and Edelweiss. Also, I was on a reading list committee in the state of Texas. We have multiple reading list committees through the Texas Library Association, and I was on Mavericks, which is the graphic novel reading list. And so when you put in your bio for that kind of stuff, publishers pay attention and they just start sending you stuff. In addition to being on the list, you do get a lot of physical advanced reader copies as well as digital ones. But when I was, increasing on my reviews, I would get a lot of messages from authors, from publishers, asking me to do reviews. And so now, like, I'll get boxes from HarperCollins, Macmillan, because I've created this brand and this account, and I'm very consistent with my posting. And that's what I feel like it really boils down to, is that they feel like they can send me stuff and I'm not just hoarding it and keeping it. And then that I do read it and get it out there in the world and really try to hype it up as much as I can for those authors.
So you just kind of alluded to something. So you are getting these boxes of ARCs and they are labeled as such, advanced reader copies.
Yes.
Are they making their way onto the shelves of your library? The school library.
So, yes, we are
the school library.
The adult ones stay here.
Yes.
Or I'll give them like to teachers if it's like adult copies and stuff. But no, we have a book vending machine that we got this year. And since we can't put ARCs in the library, since they're not final copies, that's where they go now. And so whenever I go to conferences, TLA, ALA, you come back with bags and bags of books and stuff like that. And I always used to be like, what can I do with these? Like, yes, I can give them away, but I love the idea of the reward that we do at our campus. We reward kids in lots of different ways for different types of things, not just grades, not just behavior. The classes with the most checkouts, for example, got a token and they were able to get these books out of the vending machine. So that's why I feel like it's so great that I'm able to have so much access to these physical copies, because then they end up in the hands of kids, which is what we all want anyway.
So listeners are going to want to know, did you get your vending machine with your Scholastic Book Fair points? How did you get your vending machine?
So our district has an education foundation, and I wrote a grant through it last year, and I have the grant that I can share. I didn't get it because I feel like it asked for the full amount of the grant. But my principal was so excited about it, she took it to our PTA, and they funded it for me this year.
Wow. So let me ask you, because we're talking about content warnings, and ARCs always have something on the cover. Are your middle schoolers savvy enough to understand that? Or do you have something on there in addition that helps them understand what an ARC is?
Yeah, so it does have the advanced reader copy, but honestly, like I've compared ARC against final copies a lot. And with the exception of a few typos here or there or some formatting issues, they're very, very similar. And the kids really just want to read the story. So they're not as picky as some adults usually are when it comes to ARCs. I just want to get it in their hands, right? But when it comes to our middle school, we have books on our shelves that are middle grade, and we have books on our shelves that are young adults. So just like how I do for the books in the library where I have a young adult sticker that goes on the spine, I put it on the front of the book and the vending machine on like the bottom row so that they know the bottom row is young adult books, and that way they're aware and they can see it on there. Because I'm not, that's a whole other thing, but I'm not going to ever tell kids what they can and cannot read. I've met so many sixth graders that are mature enough to read young adult books and their parents buy them for them and all that kind of stuff. So I want them to have the option. So I always manage to stock both in the vending machine.
Got it. Okay. All right. Cool. So nice segue into content warnings. I don't know if it's fair to say that this is a common or a regular practice. You certainly aren't the first librarian to say content warnings are something that would support a certain purpose. And we can talk about this because not everybody maybe feels the same way about content warnings. This isn't a new concept, but could you tell us about how you came around to the position you hold today, which is content warnings are important to provide for our readers?
Absolutely. So about 2 years ago, I was doing my reviews and everything, and I was reading a particularly a young adult book that had a lot of and some people call them trigger warnings. I personally don't, because for me, when I hear trigger, I think of guns, and that's just a trigger for me. So, when I hear that, but it's the same concept, right? It's an idea that if you are reading about something that has a very heavy topic, or even not a heavy topic, but maybe it's a topic that was important to you, that it can create a lot of conflicting emotions. And so when I was reading it, it was very hard for me to continue to read it. And I don't know if everyone know Mindy McGinnis. It's the book Heroin, which deals with drug abuse and lots of things that happen to the lead character. And so it was very hard for me. And I kept thinking, like, why is this so hard? Like, I read books all the time that have dark and all these things in it. But that particular one really, I was struggling to finish. I kept putting it down. And I read very fast, and I'm always like, let's get to the next one, because I always feel like I'm going to die with this huge TBR and I'm never going to finish it. So I was like, I've got to figure out what it is. And so I started doing some research into what content warnings are, because I was afraid that one of my students would check out this book and have a similar reaction. And as an adult, I know how to deal with those emotions. As a child, that's difficult for them to process through those things if they are triggered by the content that are in some of the books that are out today. So when I was researching, I noticed that a lot of authors, well, not a lot, but a good amount of authors that I read in young adult and middle grade are starting to put their own content warning at the beginning of the book. And they're also putting links to different organizations, different nonprofits, where kids can go and get more information about those topics if they want to explore it further. And so I was like, well, if I'm recommending all of these books out into the world for librarians to purchase, for teachers to read in their classrooms, for kids to experience, then I needed to do my due diligence. And for me, that was starting to include content warnings. But you're right. I got some backlash right away with people that think that content warnings are spoilers. And I understand where they're coming from on that. I do. And so I started putting my content warnings in the comments of my Instagram posts so that it wasn't, if you didn't want to read it, you look below. And so is that so that was something that I felt like I could meet you halfway on. When that person messaged me right away, and it was my first time hearing something, because honestly, I didn't see another side. I was like, what's wrong with putting content warnings out there? Like, we want to protect our kids.
This is just about the most candid conversation I've had in a while. Yeah. How could anybody disagree with me? I'm right, aren't I? Well, of course I'm right. There isn't another opinion. So forgive me. Let's delve into this person's comment, because there are listeners right now who are like, I need convincing. Convince me that this is an appropriate thing to do, because I'll be honest, in my almost 17 years as being a school librarian, the closest thing I've come to a content warning is, hey, kiddo, grab a box of Kleenex because this one's a weeper. And I don't go into the fact that the sister dies or the dog dies, because it's always the grandma who dies. But, it is, but again, like, I've never formally done anything about that. So what is it that, like, I know I appreciate that people are saying you've spoiled the story, you spoiled this, but I mean, I'm almost thinking like, I'm also thinking there's a little CYA in there. Like, there's a little like as the librarian, by providing content warnings, you have done a cover your, what, friends, and in making sure that any potential objection that might be raised, you've beat them to the punch. You're like, oh, no, do not come at me, because there's already a content warning on here. It's like the video game industry, friends. It is exactly like the video game industry.
Well, I started doing this before book banning got into this big deal. And so then when people were like, well, if I see that my child's reading this book that has X, Y, and Z in it, I don't want them to read it. I'm like, great. That's why I put it on the front. So when you open the book, I created stickers, or I had a friend of mine who had like a stationery store, create a sticker that has like the most common content warnings that you'll find out there. And we went through a database, which is linked in the show notes, about if you like very popular titles that we could look up and we could check. And that was something my library helped me with. So that, yes, if a kid opens a book and they see this title has this, and this in it, and they don't want to read that, or they know their parents don't want them to read it, then they don't check it out. And then it becomes their partial responsibility, middle school, right? When I tell my 6th graders, hey, we have 2 different kinds of books in our library. We have middle grade and we have young adult. And they run to the young adult because they think I'm like hiding something from them. Like that, it's like, rated R type movie kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, if you are looking for that, you got to read a whole bunch before you get to something that has like any kind of PG-13, vibe to it. And so then they're very quickly to go back to Type Movie Kid or whatever their 6th grade heart desires and what they want to read. But for me, I felt like it was important to have those stickers in the book because of all of the things I felt like that have come out of the pandemic with our social emotional learning and the things that our students are going through. They watch a lot of shows, right? And at the beginning of some of these shows, like I'm going to use 13 Reasons Why, the book is, can be, it can be triggering for some students. And so when the show comes out at the beginning, they have a warning. And so I feel like it's not anything new. Like you said, it's really not. but I feel like it's in the best interest of our students to give them that chance to be like, whoa, I'm not quite ready to read this, watch this, hear this, that kind of thing. And for me, like I if everyone's ever like looking for a reason why this is important, I have a trans student who is an 8th grader now, but was a 6th grader when I started doing this and posting these reviews. And they were so excited to read a new book. They read my review and saw that it had transphobia in it. And they were like, I'm not ready for that. That would have been really upsetting for me to read something like that. And it might have sent me into a place, you know, because they had been hospitalized for several different things at that point already. And they were like, I really appreciate you doing that. So I think about that conversation a lot as my reason why I do this. And to me, a spoiler is not enough reason to protect the mental health and the physical health of my students.
I've got that. Oh, friends. I knew as soon as Amanda suggested this topic, I knew we had to have this conversation. So, you know, I'm wondering, so the last time I was sobbing in the car, ugly crying while trying to drive at a very high rate of speed to work. So I listen to audiobooks and I don't read anything about them before I'm talking about Jeff Zentner's In the Wild Light. And I swear to God, ugly sobbing in the car.
Oh, yeah.
And
oh, yeah. Jeff will get you every time.
I swear. And I was a disaster. And and my eyes were red and I got to work. Walk me through the process. You're going to put a content warning on that book for a couple reasons. And you said it's on the inside cover and there's a label, but you check off the boxes of the things that, am I right? Okay, so give us
Yes, if the book doesn't already have it.
Right. So give us a little bit of a walkthrough when you are looking, you've looked the book up in this database, you've used what you know already about having read the book. You're going to then affix this label to the inside cover with check boxes. Is this like a 3x5 or a 4x6 label, or?
It fits most of the page. I'm going to be honest, because I wanted to include as many as I could without having, I do have an other, because of course there's some that, are very specific or, you don't use that often or, whatever. But I wanted to kind of cover the, rigmarole of all it could be, to make sure that it was also an easier process for us when we were going through the database to check. And yeah, it does. But also, if you are of the fan or of the mindset that this is a spoiler, you just turn that page and you don't look at that, there are some people that it doesn't matter what it is. They want to be surprised, or they want to be, they feel like, oh, if I said that there is death in the book, but that is spoiling it all. Because I really want to be clear that I'm not specific with character names or anything like that. Or on page 361, the grandfather dies. Like that's not the kind of content warning I'm talking about. I'm talking about, that there is a death included. And sometimes I'll say parental death because I have kids that have just lost a parent and they don't want to read about that. But they could read about, a dog dying. Kids check out Old Yeller all the time. I'm like, what are y'all doing to yourselves? But not all of them care about, that kind of stuff. So that's also part of it. Some of these kids, they don't have triggers. Like there are kids that don't need that at all. So those kids are not the ones that I do this for, right? I do it for the kids that are in a vulnerable place for whatever reason. And I wanted to protect them. And so kids, I don't know how they are in high school, but my kids judge books by the cover all the time. They don't read the inside flap. They don't search a certain thing. They go and they grab it and they check it out, and that's what they're reading. So if they're not doing their due diligence to look into the book themselves, at least they have that inside, label to see if there's something in there that they don't want to read about.
Got it. I think that it doesn't matter what age we are. I think that what sets us off sometimes is really unexpected.
Right.
And again, the ugly crying, I mean, and I think anybody who has experienced loss, sometimes it does sneak up on you.
Mm-hmm.
And, you may tell yourself, I am in a place where I can function every day and drive to work and not lose my ability to focus on the road because I'm so busy crying because, but I truly, I think that we pride ourselves on being informed consumers. We are informed consumers about everything we do. And in the age of the internet, we can do our due diligence.
Right.
We can find out. And, when you think about it, especially like a digital, like an audiobook, you can read the summary if you want to. It's right there. I wanted to use a very specific example because this was a book that was incredibly hard for me to read as someone who watched the explosion of the Challenger. It happened, but the book I'm thinking about is We Dream of Space by Erin Entrada Kelly. And I'm thinking about how I tried very hard to enjoy the book and somehow caught myself wanting it to have a different ending because I knew what was coming.
Right.
And the kids, if you're just picking this book up for the first time and you're like, I'm going to read this book, and you have no idea, your sense of your experience reading this book and my experience, like I was not enjoying myself. I was like, oh, come on. They've got to change the ending. They've got to change. Nope, they did not change the ending. I was like, so how do you address a book like that where it's knowable, right? I mean, the kids, all you have to do is do a quick Google search to know exactly what happens in that book. And yet, what kind of content warning would go into We Dream of Space?
So whenever it's historical fiction, I feel like kids have a fascination with things of that nature when it comes to trauma and war and stuff like that. I cannot keep World War II books on my shelf, right? Everything Alan Grant writes, my kids just eat up. Same thing for me. And I was 3 when the Challenger happened, but whenever I forget, y'all just see the look. So whenever
I was older than 3.
So whenever for me it's 9/11. For me it's 9/11, right? And so I'm in a date I think of you, right? Because I put 9/11 books in my historical fiction section, and it makes me sad every time I do it, but it's there. And so when it comes to like things like that of like a big when it's events in our past, so I do when it comes to World War II, I'll put genocide as a content warning, or I'll put explosion, fire, death, that kind of thing for something like the Challenger. Same thing with 9/11, multiple deaths, casualties, physical injuries, things like that. But I feel like I hope that when kids are reading or when they go to like the World War II books, man, they know some sort of previous knowledge. The Challenger might be a little specific, right? Because it was a one-time event that we talk about some, but not like they do with World War II. And so I feel like they kind of know that it was part of a war, and that there is death in war. And so a lot of times those books, they get that content warning. But those kids, they disassociate from it because it was so long ago, that it's hard for them to make that connection. For me, 9/11, like we lived that. That wasn't so long ago for us. And so I feel like until they've had an event like that themselves, that stuff isn't always as traumatizing. And I feel like that's also a good point about content warnings, is that a lot of times the things that trigger kids or adults or anything are things that are personal to us, things that have happened to us, a loss. Someone in our family might have tried to take their own life, or they have an eating disorder. Things like that are personal to them, are generally things that they've been through or a loved one has been through. So I feel like sometimes there is a disassociation that happens when it's, a war from a long time ago or that kind of thing. Because the kids that I'm teaching now weren't even alive when 9/11 happened. So they kind of look at it as like a history book kind of thing rather than something that's personal to them.
So question, what happens when the content warnings would also be an exact reason why our armchair activists are coming after our books? So this is, and I wonder, and the example I'll give you is Jewel Parker Rhodes' Ghost Boys, because violence by police officers is enough to get a book banned in a lot of districts. So when you look at police violence, that is oftentimes a reason why a book is banned. So what do you do about content warnings, which would unfortunately provide some sort of like map for our armchair activists who are coming after anything that might possibly offend the sensibilities of somebody? Never mind the fact that the internet exists and the children are all walking around with the world in their pockets. So, but we're going to be afraid of a book. Yes, which requires the children to read the book. I mean, but you're setting the bar very high. When you're concerned about the internet, you're just watching. When you're talking about content in the books that we have on our shelves, there is a certain amount of effort expected because you have to read said book. But what do you do when the content warning is LGBTQIA?
So I'm of the feeling that these books, I'll tell anyone that'll listen, like I have them in my library. I have them for my kids, and I've seen the difference that they have made in their lives, the letters, the emails, the notes that I have gotten from kids that having this book, seeing themselves on the shelf, saved their life. And so there's nothing that anyone can say or do that would ever change my mind on that. I'm also not somebody that hides my collection. You can go online and look and see the kinds of books that I have. I share them regularly. If I'm reading and reviewing a middle grade or YA, the chances of me buying it are very high, regardless of it being possibly banned in some places. And yes, for some people, they'd be like, ooh, that's like shining a big spotlight on these books. But for me, the way I look at it is kind of how I said earlier, is that your child, had the opportunity to look and see that there are things in this book that you may not like them to read, because I'm not going to label books with an LGBTQ sticker because I don't want to out any of my students before they're ready. And so I feel like if they are able to open it and see, oh, this has LGBTQIA plus content in it, then your child should be like, oh, my parents don't want me to read that. I'm going to put that up. And so in a sense, I feel like it can help them, right? Because there's not like, you're not going to get to page 250 and be shocked that there's a drag queen in this book. No, because we put it at the front, the kind of things that it might, trigger you, or content warnings. So in that case, it's fine for me. But I feel when it comes to book banning, that you need to have a very strong school board policy. And I feel like my district has created a very strong school board policy that for them to try to ban, I did have a parent try to ban all of the LGBTQIA plus books in my entire library. But our school board policy says that it has to be one book. So he would have to read all of them. And there is a good amount in my library because I have a good amount of students that fall into that category on my campus. And so I definitely want every kid that walks through my door to be able to find a book where they see themselves. And so I'm going to continue to advocate for that. And I'm not trying to hide anything. That's actually the exact opposite of what I want to do. I want parents to know what we have in our library. And as a parent, that's a big part of their job, is to, check on their kids and what are you reading? What are you watching? What are you looking at on your phone? And so I know they can't fight the internet, but they can fight their school, their local school. And that's where I feel like they're trying to do. But, I'm going to protect these kids as best I can.
Well, and I'm thinking, and when you hear some of the diatribe, when you hear some of what these groups are saying about us, and I say us as in school librarians, we're always painted as being sneaky, as being nefarious, as being, we are grooming them, and we're doing it in a way that nobody is noticing because all we're doing is just handing them a book. But in this case, you can't be accused of any of that because you're like, it's right there. And, I do think that it's something of a survival strategy because nobody can accuse you of being at all.
Yeah, like underhanded. I'm not trying to sneak anything. Yeah.
You're not manipulating anybody. You're not sort of sneaking content into a student with the hopes of, of course, converting them or twisting their fragile minds, because you've already done the work of indicating what might be an alarm for a reader. And in this case, given that we are dealing with children, what might also be an alarm for their families. I love that you mentioned the value that when the authors themselves include, either something at the beginning of the book that gives readers just a little bit of a heads up, and especially those notes at the end. And I'm always listening to them because it's just part of the audiobook. And so for me, it's a little harder to tell what does the reader see when they open the book as opposed to what does the listener hear when they're listening to that portion of the book. But I know, at least when I've heard a postscript or, a notes from the author, I have always made a point of telling my readers, hey, there's going to be a bit at the end or there's a bit in the beginning. You really might value this book or see this book in a little different light if you read what the author has to say. And I'm thinking about the book Prairie Lotus and the author's note in Prairie Lotus. And it was...
Oh, Linda.
It blew me away. And I was like, it was almost as much of value. I mean, for me, I value the book on a completely different level if somebody's going to hold my hand and explain the journey to me. Because all of a sudden, and I know Prairie Lotus has gotten some criticism as well. And so it really, for me, it really was part of the reading experience. And I want to make sure that my students realize, hey, when you get to this part of the book, keep on going. Do yourself a favor and read that part. I tell my educators, what? Read the end first. Read the author's note before you start, because it's going to completely give you a better idea of what you want to do with a class if you do this as a read aloud. So for sure.
And sometimes, it'll bump it up a whole star for me. Like, if I was like, oh, this was a good book, and then I read the author's note about why they wrote it or what the impact was in their life, I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. And so, it might totally change, how I feel about the book as a whole. So I agree with that 100%.
So I'm going to say something out loud. I've never done this, but I've already talked to my social worker, my school psychologist, and my counselors, because they're always about getting resources to the kids. In many respects, we do the same job, Our job is getting things to our kids. Their job is getting things to kids. They're looking at making sure that they intervene when a book has, and in this case, they're dealing with their students and I'm dealing with the books. And I want to make sure that we are literally on the same page when it comes to getting the resources to our students who need them. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to include in something on the inside cover, here are some, here's a QR to this here. If a little something, hey, our counselors are always here to help, or we have school psychologists and social workers who are available to talk with you if this is something that you feel you could use some support. If you would like some support because you're feeling this book has brought out some feelings that you really want to work through with somebody. in my head, that's what I want. I'm thinking this would be a really good thing to do.
Yeah, so I do something similar. So I buy like a lot of my nonfiction books every year. I use Capstone, and they do buy the book, get the ebook free, or they do like little promotion things like that. And so what I'll do is I'll have the QR code and I'll put it on the inside of the books that have potential like eating disorder issues. And I'll make sure to have that because a lot of times they don't want to check out the physical book. Like who's taking a bulimia book to the checkout, like without us thinking, oh, red flag, what's going on, And some of them aren't ready to share that journey. They may not know how, or if they've been a victim of sexual assault, or, if there's human trafficking, God forbid, going on, they may not know how to reach out or what resources are available. And so I do that for all of the ones that I can, that I have nonfiction books, or our counselors have QR codes around the whole school. Need to talk to a counselor, scan this. And so we're a one-to-one iPad district. So they have an iPad with them all the time. So they have equal access, I feel like, to my digital collection as well as to our physical collection. And so, yes, I want to be able to marry those. And then our high school librarian purchased a set, and I'd have to ask her like what the company that she used was, because it was in correlation with her school counselors of all of these digital resources on what to do if you, suffer from an eating disorder, or have suicidal ideation, or any of these type, or self-harming, things like that. And she put them on QR codes in the bathrooms. She put them by the water fountain. She put them in the front office. She put them in the cafeteria, like all over the school. And they are not one user, one access, that kind of thing. It's literally like anyone can access these titles. And the counselors were just like so excited about it, because a lot of times our kids are not going to walk up to a counselor that maybe they've never talked to before or don't have a relationship with and just spill their life secret to. But if they can get access to these resources, or they can see somebody that is I'm going to use Tweet, Lori Halsey Anderson, that's a survivor of sexual assault. And they may not know that wasn't okay, that what happened to them is not normal, and what they should do, and who they can talk to and who they can trust. So, books like that, I've always said books save lives. And I firmly believe that. But sometimes the book itself might, create this aha moment for these kids. And then what? And then what? If they don't have someone on campus that they feel comfortable going to, if they don't know what the next step is after realizing like a trauma that they've been through or something like that, then the book may not have been that helpful, because they are still stuck in this silent world that they're living in. So yes, 100%. The next step is going to be providing them resources and making sure they know that they can talk to a trusted adult if they've been through any of these things.
Well, and I think it's just because I've recently read the book, but we were talking before we started recording about Girl in Pieces and Kathleen Glasgow. And I was very just struck by just how carefully the story was constructed to make sure that when and for me it was, I'm looking through, this is my window. This is a window read for me. And I think in the back of my head, I'm very aware of some students who have demonstrated some clear self-harm. And
right.
So I was very aware that this was a book I was going to have in my library, so I was committed to reading it. But I was very aware by how skilled she was, because in knowing who her audience was going to be, there was never going to be a glorification of this, a romanticism. Let me say what.
Right.
There
romanticism,
was never.
Yes.
Romanticism. Nobody is going to make this look like fun. This is,
right.
And it was, that there are going to be some struggles, but you also recognize that there is so much of her own lived experience that is going
right.
to come out in the pages of this book, so that you have to trust. I'm learning that I have to trust the authors who are pouring their souls into these books that they are going to work in a place where our students are in good hands. That our students, when they do read these books, and this is something that might be on their horizon, might be on their something that they are thinking about, that this kind of book is something that is going to give them some idea of what others who have experienced its feelings and something close to it. I don't even have the right words for it, but I think I was so struck by how much I trusted the author to bring the story to a place where our readers could feel some empowerment, some guidance as to what to do when, and this is true of books that talk about grief and loss and abuse, because you have people who, if they are writing from personal experience, are also adding that layer of how we move through the experience. And so, I mean, for that reason alone, it's so vital that we have some of these books that I just sort of just call edgy. They're edgy books. These are books that are going to be talking about some really tough topics. But it's so vitally important. You have students who work with you closely, people who have young people who have come to trust you as a person in their school. Have they added some of the, do you use what they say when you incorporate them into this process of getting these content warnings in the inside covers of these books? I would be curious to know if they've talked to you about this process or reflected on it and the value that they have in being part of your library program.
Yeah, so I am always giving them choices. You know, when they come in every day, it's, do you want to do this or do you want to do this? Because I always have stuff to do. So content warnings was something I had to specifically talk to them about. Usually every year I have one big project that I do, and that was this one. And so beforehand, obviously, I don't want to trigger kids looking up trigger warnings for these books, right? Like, I don't want them to feel any type of way. So it was always an option. If they didn't feel like they wanted to do that day, they always could opt out, you know, because it can get a little heavy sometimes when they're looking up information on these databases about the books. And I never want that to be a trigger for them as well. So, yes, but also, not a lot, but some of my library aides are not readers. Like, that's not always how I pick kids, you know. It's a great perk if you can also recommend books when you're checking out, but it is not a requirement. So when some of them are reading these like content warnings and things like that, and they're reading the blurbs about the books, and this happened last year when I did my diversity audit, they're reading about these titles and they're like, why would this ever be banned? And so, like, out of the mouths of babes, right? And so whenever I'm talking to them about it, and they're like, yeah, my sister has an eating disorder, or Miss Hunt, like, my dad struggles with alcoholism, or you know, like, they are very candid, and I am very close with the students. I wish I could be close with almost 1,000 students that I have on my campus, but I'm definitely close with my library aides. I spend a lot of time with them, and they are very honest with me. And so I feel like these people that are fighting for book bans and like these books not to be in libraries don't know that our kids are going through this. Like, we can ban the books. It's not going to change what the kids are going through. Like, they are struggling with these topics and these issues. And it's not always an easy thing. And so I feel like their perspective is why I did it in the first place, because I'm talking to people and they're like, oh, what's it like working with middle schoolers and that kind of thing. And they think that their biggest issue is like TikTok dances and all this kind of thing. And I'm like, man, some of these kids, you know, they have a lot going on. And especially since the pandemic, I've seen these, you know, like, and like just last year, not funny, but it was something that I had noted 43 days in a row. I had at least one student in my office crying about something. And it ran the gamut from this kid looked at me wrong to I'm struggling with staying alive today. And so I get real close with my counselors, because when I see things like that, or the kids tell me something, it's something that I immediately need to let them know about. And we have 2 amazing Latino men counselors on our campus. And if you ran our diversity of our campus, the majority falls into the Latinx population. So to have them as a representation, and them being so sensitive and like so caring, like our kids need to see men in those roles. And so I work very, very close with them to make sure that they have these resources. And honestly, last Thursday, I got a phone call in my 6th period. I was teaching, and they're like, Miss Hunt, this kid, you're the only one on campus that they'll talk to, and we have to get them into a safe hospital really quick. And so can you come? And so I had to stop what I was doing and get down to the office, because this child had relapsed. And so, to be that person for even just one kid, and to have that book make a difference for even just one kid, for me, is worth all of it. So that's hard to talk about. But
I don't want to upset you.
No. I want people to know, that.
But again, this is why we're here, and the kid, we're here to be here for our students. And I think when you are as upfront in what you put in on your shelf, I think the students have to realize you are in their camp. Like you are there to be a support for them. And I think they have to recognize that at this point. They see that.
Right.
You've talked about this trigger warning database. I am surprised. I don't know why that. I shouldn't be surprised that exists. It makes complete sense. So, it sounds like it, and I took a look at it. I was like, wow, this is really comprehensive. And,
it is.
And maybe, so it was very eye-opening. But I'm going to say, when you are putting content warnings on the books, do the content warnings also get put on the record in your OPAC?
No. So when we use Destiny Follett, and so whatever record shows up whenever I put in the ISBN, that's what I keep. But a lot of times, I'll be able to go and look and see, especially with an example, you used Girl in Pieces. It's gonna have some of those already in there. And so if it's the big one, what the whole plot of the story is about, generally you're gonna find it in there. But when I read books to review, and I know it's hard for some people to be thinking at the end of the book, what were all the content warnings that you just caught, So for me, sometimes I'll take notes, or I'll jot things down, or so for me, one that is one of my content warnings personally is when somebody vomits. That I just picture in my mind, and it's disgusting, and I just been ugh. And so I always include it in case there's other people in there. Now, it's not going to stop me from reading a book, but for some people, I do want them to know that it's in there. And so whenever I'm reading a book for myself, sometimes I'll take notes, but generally I read pretty quickly that I can remember what the content warnings were. But also, Trigger Warnings database is on Goodreads. And so I follow them. So whenever they've read a book that I have just read, they have content warnings, but sometimes I catch some that they didn't put in. And so they're doing the good work, right? So they're doing the best that they can. And so if I ever catch any, I'll add it and I'll send it in to them, be like, oh, there's also this. And sometimes it's also grown. They've been doing this for several years now. And so what we were looking for in a few years ago may not be something we're looking for now. I include COVID now as one of my content warnings that I wasn't including a few years ago, obviously, right? So, because some people don't want to read about COVID, we've experienced it the last few years, and they're done. And so, if it has anything to do with that, sometimes I'll make sure to include it so people know.
I'm really curious because listeners are listening to all the things that you are talking about. If somebody decided to tackle this on any sort of level, what would you recommend would be the best strategy? Would you recommend pulling the books that you feel most need those warnings first? Or would you go alphabetical? Or would you decide to say, I'm going to pull all the books, all the books that have, death in the family. We're just going to get all those death of the family books in here. And we're going to start. So how would you recommend, because it sounds like you use one form that you will then indicate. So how did you tackle this? How would you recommend tackling this if a listener is saying, I think I need to do something like this on some level?
Yeah, I think that definitely, obviously you can do this a multitude of ways, kind of like how you listed. But I feel like, I would hit the big ones first. If that was something that I was really, wanting to dip my toe into, you can, search topics on suicide. Like, for example, I feel like that's a big one that can be very hard for some of our kids to read about. And we had a student return from being hospitalized last year that had tried to commit suicide. And I was very quick to check some of their checkouts and not dissuade them, but to let them know, like, hey, this is coming. I'm going to start putting these content warning stickers in there. I just know what you've been through lately, and I don't want you to feel any type of way about, the thing that you went through, because it could be a completely different situation than what the character went through in the story. But it could also be something that's very close to their heart. So if that's something that or like on your campus, you're struggling with a lot of kids that are, coming from an abusive family, or just like any of those, like that you're seeing a lot with some kids that you feel like they would benefit from, that's definitely something that you could do, is to go and look in the trigger warning database and see the books that are hitting some of those higher things. And then the ones that, like, mention blood or, gore. Some of them want those kind of books, if they're looking for something scary. Then those might be lower on your list. So yeah, if it's like, I only have this amount of time to do it. Luckily for me, like, I use my library aides. And so it's like, I have like my own little mini workers that are helping me with this. And it was my 1 year long project for it. And so, so I feel like you could, a lot of people don't have this much help or have this much time, to be able to do a large scale project like this. So yeah, I would think about your population, talk to your counselors maybe, and see what our kids are talking about. For some of them, it might be anxiety disorder. It might be because we do have a lot of kids. At TLA this past April, there was an author panel with Nick Stone and a lot of other great, amazing young adult authors. And they did a content warning before the panel started. Like, it was a verbal, we're about to talk about some heavy issues. If this is something that you feel like you can't handle at this moment, feel free to step out if you get overwhelmed. Like, it was amazing. I'd never heard that before a panel started. And they did that with several of them. They did it with that one, and they did it with anything that was talking about social emotional learning, or our LGBTQIA plus population, or any of our authors that are dealing with racial issues in their books. And so to be able to hear that, it just really kind of hit home how much this is becoming a part of our publishing world, and how authors are making it a big point to point that, to put these warnings at the beginning of their books for the readers. And then a lot of authors that I'm seeing are even putting them out in their Twitter posts and their Instagram, just like, even like, hey, if you want more information about it, you can go to my website. So for those of you that think it's a spoiler, like, hey, you can also just go to the website, but know that this, and this are going to happen in this book. And if you don't feel like you're strong enough to handle that right now, or not in a good headspace, then this is maybe a later read for you. So I really appreciated that. And I feel like it's so important to protect all of us, really.
Oh, you've given us so much to go on. I'm wondering, just because teachers will give us their opinion whether we ask for it or not, which is another podcast episode, by the way. That's another episode. The unsolicited commentary that we get from non-librarians. Thank you very much. I would be curious to know, since you've done this, and it's a relatively new addition to your collection.
Yes.
Have you gotten any sort of feedback? I appreciate that anybody in your student service center, school counselors, psychologists, social workers are probably going to be on board with this. But what about your run-of-the-mill classroom teacher comes up and decides to tell you exactly what they think? What did they tell you?
I got great feedback from my younger teachers. And I feel like that is such a good point about where we are as a society, right? My younger teachers that talk to me are in therapy themselves, know the things that trigger them, appreciate that we're putting that in there for students, and they talk about it with the kids in the classroom. And so I feel like they just started, my 7th grade ELA teachers just started doing book clubs a few weeks ago. And so they asked me, I have book sets in my library that I've collected over the years that are newer titles that I feel like kids want to read. And so on my spreadsheet where they can go look, it has the themes, it has the content warnings, it has middle grade, young adult, and then the topics that they're going to read about. So Front Desk by Kelly Yang, right? It gets into a lot of racial issues, okay? And so they want to know what they might hear from parents. And so, and that's a legitimate issue. That is a legitimate concern that librarians and teachers face. What am I going to hear? Because it's one thing to offer a book in a library as a choice. It's another to tell kids, this is what you're going to read. And so that's what I love about their book club is that they do like a restaurant, Starbucks, whatever you want to call it, book tasting. And they give the kids the choices and they lay it out for them real clear. And New Kid by Jerry Craft, you're going to learn about what it's like to be a person of color going to a very affluent private school. And they're going to talk about race and they're going to talk about potential police issues. And so my younger teachers were here for it. My older teachers didn't really have an opinion one way or the other. They didn't say, oh, I love it or, oh, I hate it. But they were like, oh, I have a kid that just talked to me about how they binge and purge and that book may not be for them. And I'm like, or that book may really be for them because they don't know how to ask for help or they told their teacher and now what, right? What does the character in the book do? Because I will say you talked about how these authors are taking such great care of the content that they put in there, but there's always hope. Like that's what I love. I feel like 99% of these books that we're reading where these things are happening to the kids in the book or the families in the book, they end it with a little bit of hope, I feel like, in the ones that I've been reading and have been reading the last several years. And that's so important for our kids. I don't know how many times I've told, a lot. I ran our LGBTQI plus club on campus and I can say all day long, like it's going to get better, but it's different for me as a straight white female to say that than they read a book about a kid that had a horrible experience and then is able to move past it and continue to be successful in life. And that is very empowering for those kids, I feel like.
Amanda Hunt, you are a gem, and I am so grateful that you and I could share this conversation with listeners. It would not surprise me if somebody decided to follow up and ask you a question. I feel like you've given us so much to go on already. Friends, the show notes are fantastic. Make sure you spend some time. Amanda, would you let us know where can our listeners find you so that they can add you to their PLN?
Yes. So I did brand myself. I am the next gen librarian. A teacher friend actually came up with that for me. And I am on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Snapchat. I'm on TikTok, Hive, all the places. So you can find me in all the platforms. And I am happy to answer any questions. People DM me all the time. Hey, what was that thing you posted about? And I will happily share it. I've the feeling of we need to be sharing all the things with each other all the time.
Amanda, when this episode airs, I think you're going to have like 2 days of school left. I'm so excited for you. I truly am. Amanda, have a fantastic summer. And thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Dream come true.
Friends, in addition to following Amanda Hunt on social media, you're going to want to make sure to take a deep dive into all the fantastic resources Amanda so generously shared with us in our show notes today. If you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help others find us. And lastly, be sure to use the code UNITED to take advantage of Capstone's generous $20 discount off an order of $100 or more, and consider scheduling your very first Literati Book Fair by July 31st for this fall 2023 and receive a $500 Titlewave gift card. The topic of our next episode will be library love and my conversation with Carrie Friday. I hope you will tune in.